Hey guys, today's notes is going to be over biomolecules, and it's Unit 1. So this is our first set of notes that will go in your science notebook. So the title of your notes that'll go in your composition notebook is Biomolecules, and you'll add that into the table of contents. So once we get back in person, we will be checking that composition notebook, and it is going to be part of your grade every 6 weeks. So make sure you just have everything in order. I'll tell you when I want something in the notebook. So this will go in your notebook. So title is Biomolecules, and the word bio means life, okay? So basically biomolecules are the building blocks of life. So everything that's living is biomolecules. So bio means life. So basically a biomolecule is molecules for life. That's what we just got done saying. So you'll add these two things as the first two lines in your notes. I'm going to kind of walk you through that so you kind of get my teaching style, and then as we as we progress, you'll know what needs to be written down in your notebook, okay? So a biomolecule is molecule of life, and it's also called an organic compound. Okay, and the word organic means that it is made with carbon. So I'm just going to put with carbon. Okay. It's also a macromolecule. And a macro means big, large. Okay. So there are 4 types of biomolecules that we're going to be talking about in this chapter. We're going to go over kind of their definition, what their breakdown is, what their function is. I'll give you an example of each of the 4, and then we're also going to draw them so that you can see what they look like. But the 4 types of biomolecules that we're going to go over are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. The first type of biomolecule we're going over is carbohydrate. So here are the 4 categories we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about carbohydrate as a monomer, the elements in carbohydrate, the function of a carbohydrate, and then just a few examples. So if you're looking at this word and you don't understand what it is, a monomer is basically just a subunit of carbohydrate. So monomers are highly reactive, and so they connect to other monomers. So if this is a monomer, this is a monomer, this is a monomer, they tend to, link together, and each one of these is a monomer, and then all of them together would be called a polymer. Okay, so monomer for carbohydrate is called a, forgot an H. Saccharide. Okay, and so they connect to each other. They're highly reactive, but the subunit of a carbohydrate. The element is carbon, of course. All biomolecules are going to contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So that's the elements in a carbohydrate, and it's in a 1-to-1 ratio. Okay, what that means, it means 1 carbon, 2 hydrogen, and 1 oxygen. That's the ratio that it's going to keep to form a carbohydrate. So if there are, let's just say there were 2 carbon, then that means there would have to be 4 hydrogen, and then there would have to be 2 oxygen, okay? So as long as you're keeping that same ratio, it would form a carbohydrate, okay? And the function is short-term energy. Okay, carbohydrates are short-term energy. And also they are the cell walls in a plant. So they are the cell wall in a plant. Okay, and just a couple of examples of carbohydrates are sugar. That one's easy to remember because that is definitely short-term energy. Starch. And then your potato, your pasta, your bread. And so this is probably the type of biomolecule that you've heard the most, and you've heard of all these things, and you might be familiar with some of the functions, but getting more in depth, you know, the element, what makes up a carbohydrate, and then the ratio, okay? The next type of biomolecule we're going over is lipids, and the monomer for a lipid is made up of 1 glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Okay, and remember that's just the subunit of the lipid, so these create these monomers that will attach together. Okay, and the elements are actually the same as carbohydrate. It's carbon, like I said, is in every single one of them, hydrogen and oxygen. Only the difference this time is the hydrogen to oxygen ratio. Remember, those two mean ratio. The ratio is greater than 2-to-1. Okay, remember this sign means, greater than. Okay, so for a carbohydrate, the hydrogen to oxygen ratio is exactly 2-to-1. Well, for it to be a lipid, or lipids, have a ratio of, it's got to be greater than 2-to-1. So it can be anything as long as it's greater than 2-to-1, okay? And the function of a lipid is long-term energy. Okay, so these are your fats. These are your long-term energy. And so it's also the cell wall in animals. Okay, and just a couple of examples of lipids is, you know, it's your butter, your oil, your waxes, your hormones, and your steroids. Okay, so lipids is your long-term energy. Okay, so not like carbohydrate. Remember, it was short-term, real quick energy. Lipids is a little bit more of a longer, steadier energy. The third type of biomolecule is protein. So again, this is another one that you heard a lot of. All three of them, carbohydrates, lipids, and protein, you probably heard of. So proteins, the monomer for proteins is amino acid. And there are actually 20 different amino acids in the order of the chain. So after they, attach together, all these monomers attach together, the order of it determines the function of the protein. So that's something we'll get into a little later. Right now, all I need you to know is that the monomer is amino acids, okay? So the elements made up of carbon, again, we'll see that every single time, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, okay? Sometimes, we're gonna put over here, sometimes phosphorus and sulfur, okay? So the function of a protein is, it's a catalyst, so catalyzing reactions. And it's also an intercellular, so inside the cell, communication. And we'll get more into this more in depth a little later. Right now you just need to know it kind of tells the cell, kind of helps with communication inside the cell. So, so some examples are keratin, catalase, collagen, and insulin. Okay. And the final one we're going over is nucleic acids. So the monomer is called nucleotides. And a nucleotide is one base, one sugar, and one phosphate. Okay. The elements, what it's made out of is carbon, like always, like all four, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Okay. And the function of a nucleic acid is to store or transfer genetic material. Okay, so to store, transfer genetic material. And examples of nucleic acids, there's only 2 examples. Okay, so we're gonna put right here, only in big letters, only 2 examples. The other ones, there were, unlimited amounts, but for this one, there's only 2, and that is RNA and DNA. Those are the only 2 examples of nucleic acids. So I'm going to show you what these 4 biomolecules look like after we draw them. So a carbohydrate looks like kind of like a bicycle chain. And then coming off the sides, it has these oxygen and hydrogens attached to it. Okay, so that's what a carbohydrate would look like. A lipid looks like this. Okay, this solid line right here is the glycerol. And it has these little squiggly lines coming off of it. And these squiggly lines are called the fatty acid. So when we went over, the monomer, the elements, this is kind of how that is organized. So the protein, okay, on this side it has the nitrogen, the hydrogen, that's a 3. And then on this side it has carbon, 2 oxygens, and a hydrogen. The nucleic acid has on this side it's got the phosphorus and the oxygens. Those O's are the oxygen. And then a nitrogen base. Nitrogen base.